Intense fighting in Kobani, that town on the border of Syria and Turkey today. It seems heavy airstrikes on ISIS targets on the Syrian town near Turkey have at least stalled the advance of the militant group ISIS and allowed Kurdish fighters to retake some territory. The outcome there is still very unclear. Is this a critical time for the coalition to ramp up military efforts? What else will it take to win the war against ISIS? On the other hand, I also want to get into this thesis that falling oil prices, a glut in the market, who will they hurt? Russia and Iran. Is that part of a strategy? Tom Friedman floated that in the New York Times today. Let's get from Washington a perspective from Cliff May, the president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and in Waterloo, Ontario, Bessma Momani, senior fellow at the Center for International Governance and Innovation. Both of you, thanks for being here. Cliff May, real quick on the airstrikes in Kobani. What do you make of the fact that ISIS appears to be driven back a bit? What could that mean?
Well, the bombing runs have been ratcheted up quite a bit this week, and it looks like they have had an impact. But it's a long way from saying that the people of Kobani are out of the woods or out of danger. We still have to worry, and this is mainly a humanitarian crisis more than it is a strategic crisis, that the people of Kobani are going to be overrun, and if so, they'll be slaughtered by the Islamic State. So not enough has been done in the past. We're playing catch up here. The bombing has helped. More bombing may be able to help, but there's a long way to go here, and a very long way to go before we solve the problem of the Islamic State and other various nefarious actors in that region.
Bessma, I'd love your perspective on why Kobani, which has become the focal point. Obviously, it's so close to the Turkish border. It plays into domestic Turkish politics as well. But remember, ISIS now controls an area the size of the UK, essentially. Why is the fight in Kobani so important?
Well, I think many people had actually said that it's going to fall and predicted it as such, but in fact, I think the fact that we've seen so many people, reporters and citizens alike, all on the Turkish border having a bird's eye view of what's going on, really elevated the media's attention on Kobani. And so I think previously the American government and the coalition forces were very happy to forget about Kobani and move and focus on to Iraq, which is really their key strategy. But with all of this uproar about the civilian casualties that would ensue, and really the appeal for support, finally, I think, turned the American administration to finally fight for Kobani. Otherwise, I think it was clearly going to just go on the wayside.
Cliff, how important is that particular battle, or is that just the beginning of what appears to be a much more complex battle against ISIS?
Yes, exactly what you're saying. I think the point here is that if Kobani is overrun and if there's a slaughter there, that's a terrible thing from a humanitarian point of view. From a strategic point of view, and you got to be kind of clear and cold from a strategic point of view, it is less important, but it is it would be another battle won in a long series of battles being won by the Islamic State. If the Islamic State goes on from there and consolidates its hold over Anbar, takes Abu Ghraib, a mostly Sunni suburb of Baghdad, and then actually endangers Baghdad, well, now you're talking about not just individual battles, but the war. So it is not strategically important itself. It is very important because it's a humanitarian concern that we should take seriously, and it does become important as one battle in a number of battles that, going back months now, the Islamic State has been winning.
Let me move to this thesis, Bessma, and Tom Friedman in the New York Times floated this today, although it has been a thesis that many have talked about. All of a sudden, oil prices are falling. There's a lot of domestic issues here about that as well. But some have said perhaps this is something that the U.S. is not unhappy about. The glut on the market hurts two fundamental countries, Russia, and we know about the Ukraine situation, and Iran. Where are you on the impact falling oil prices could have geopolitically on both those situations?
Well, I don't buy it. I mean, I think that I would explain the falling oil prices simply by the fact that China seems cool. Many of the emerging market economies are not growing as hot as they once were. The reality that oil production is going up thanks to fracking and other newfound oil fields in much of the United States. So supply has gone up. I think that's more a better explanation as to why we're seeing the falling oil prices. To sort of come up with this conspiracy theory, this is to hurt Russia or Iran. I mean, this hurts every Gulf ally who's a part of the coalition as well. Countries like Saudi Arabia and others who really do need as much capital as possible right now to continue to basically meet their own domestic demand needs. So I don't think that's necessarily a very convincing argument that Friedman purports.
Cliff.
Yeah, I think there's at least evidence to the theory that the Saudis have made a decision to lower oil prices, and that they're doing so. And that may not be the only factor, but it could be a very key factor. And if they were doing that, it might be one directed against Iran. They want to bring the price of oil down to put additional pressure on Iran right now. It may also be some pressure on the fracking industry here in the United States and other places because the Saudis don't like that either and want to make that less lucrative. So there are any number of factors involved in this right now, any number of theories. But I think the Saudis need to be looked at carefully in terms of their role.
And how does that, Cliff, just stay with that in a minute, because you focus a lot on Iran, but how might that affect the Iranian situation? Because, as this coalition has gotten involved with the fight against ISIS, it has been a de facto alliance in a sense with the Iranians. And again, we got to be very careful about that, but that's the way from a military element has been, as well as with Assad to a certain extent, who's been fighting ISIS. What's your view on all that?
Well, this is very complicated, but let me try to make it as simple as I can. We do want to degrade and destroy ISIS, the Islamic State, absolutely. But if in so doing, we end up empowering al-Qaeda, which is its rival, or the Islamic Republic of Iran, also its rival, it'll be a blunder of historic proportions. That would be a big mistake. So to the extent it's a de facto alliance, it shouldn't be. The United States and our allies should not be the air force for the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is attempting to develop nuclear weapons. Now, the falling oil prices should present to the United States and its negotiating partners an opportunity to put further pressure on the Iranians to actually make some concessions in the nuclear talks. They've made very few so far, none that are serious. I am doubtful that this opportunity will be seized by the American negotiators because they have, in my view, not been very skilled. They've gotten rolled by the much tougher negotiators that they're encountering from Iran, who have been doing this for years and years and years. So there's an opportunity here with falling oil prices, but I'm not confident the Americans are going to grab it. And I think, the Americans have to be careful not to be supporting the Islamic Republic of Iran or al-Qaeda against ISIS. That's not how it should work.
Basma, where are you on that?
Well, I would take that one step further, and you could argue they're kind of proxies of Iran, but more importantly, I don't think what you want to have is the Americans eliminating ISIS only to embolden both the government of Baghdad and Damascus, who have really basically treated their population so poorly that you've given rise to ISIS. I think that's more important. How do you address the political vacuum? How do you address the need for political inclusion? And so far, we've spent a lot of time and effort and probably money on the military front and done very little in pushing the political inclusive process that must come to ensure that this does not get repeated again. So far, I've really seen very little that's come from the coalition other than more strikes and very little about what they're going to do on the ground to win the hearts and minds of locals.
Yeah, well, this is going to be what happens over the next series of months. And we keep hearing this is going to be a long timeline from the Brits and from the Americans, and Canada's got a 6-month timeline on that mission. Obviously, that's a critical element. Cliff May in Washington, Basma Momani in Waterloo tonight. I appreciate your perspective. Thanks so much.
Thank you.